So StreetWise was founded in, I believe, 1992. We're over 30 years old now. We are over, it was 1992. We are in the middle of our 30th anniversary plus. We celebrated it last year. We're having more just continual observances. And it was founded by Judd Lofshe as a magazine that people would sell instead of panhandling. So he actually did find some homeless people to help sell it when it first came out. It was not the first street paper in the US. I think the first one was in New York, and we were all modeled after a paper in London, but there were papers sold by people who were homeless years ago, like way years ago, 19th century, early 20th century. So that was the model. And then after the paper in London was founded, there's an international network of street papers, and it's headquartered in the UK. And so there are 100 street papers around the world, and StreetWise, again, is one of the first of them in the model. There's about 30 in North America. So we do write about homelessness, and the papers in Europe, for example, are called The Big Issue, because the big issue is homelessness. But our whole purpose is to be sold on the street to make the vendors money. So you can't write about homelessness all the time because people won't buy that. I found out about StreetWise in about 1995. So I'm I started as one of the older volunteers, and then I became a paid employee. And I had been a journalist. I graduated from Northwestern in journalism. I'm a Chicago native, so that was my plan, go to Northwestern, be a journalist. But then in those days, there were so many people who wanted to be journalists, I had to go to a smaller town to get started. So I did. I worked my way up in newspapers and magazines downstate. My first magazine was a weekly in Marseilles, Illinois, which was 70 miles away. And then I went to Dixon, Illinois, and I did a variety of jobs there, including I was the Reagan editor. And then I moved farther west, but my intention was always to get back to Chicago. So I was looking for a job in Chicago, and I went to a volunteer corps meeting, and I started as a volunteer doing the publicity for StreetWise, and I basically worked my way up. So the idea is that people can make money selling StreetWise, but I also want StreetWise to be another alternative magazine. I want it to be something that talks about how marginalized people can get by in Chicago, how you don't have to be part of the 1% to live here, and how do we tap into that creativity? How do we go back to some of the energy we had in the last 100 years? How do we make people productive so that they have good lives? So I'm trying to do all of that. As I said, I'm a native, so I feel the culture of Chicago going back through all of my history and my parents' history and my grandparents' history. I feel the city, and I'm open to letting other people tell me about their city. I get press releases from people, and I read them, and I read the news or watch the news every day, and I listen to people. When I was an editor of a weekly downstate, we had consultants from the University of Missouri. So I went to Northwestern and they were University of Missouri. So these were, top people. And this was before social media, and their advice was we had to meet 5 people a week. And we had to do a report on it. What did they say were good story ideas, and who should we interview? So I did that before there was social media. And one of the things when I was trying to get a job in journalism, I still needed a side job so that I could have benefits. So I work at a store on Michigan Avenue, a large store, well-known store, and I meet people there. I still meet 5 people a week. I still look online. I still look at my press releases. I still try to put 2 and 2 together. If I have an idea, I go researching it online until I find someone to talk to. So I try not to just always do the homelessness on the street, because I don't know whether people want to have that in their heads all the time. I don't know if they will listen to it. And again, the vendors have to sell it. So I try to look different. Like the issue we have out now is, I don't know if you want me to tell what day we're interviewing, but we'll just say the issue we have out now is on Dance for Life. Now, Dance for Life is a benefit for dancers. And that sounds kind of fluffy, but it's not, because dancers often, only 5% of all dancers get health insurance with their job, which means some of them have the dance job and then they have a side gig to bring in more money. And the person I interviewed at the Chicago Dancers Union said he knows someone with 5 jobs. Now, if somebody has 5 jobs, there's a couple of things that can happen. If they lose one job, they can be, just financially shot. But it's also hard on the body. I mean, you can do that in your 20s, but I don't know how long you can do it. So dancers are physically living sort of on the edge. But yet this is what the new culture in Chicago requires for Chicago to be a culture, happening city. So Dance for Life is a benefit, and the money goes into the Dancers Fund, which helps provide, maintenance insurance, or if you have a big bill that you can't pay, you can apply for it. Well, this is the same thing as the emergency fund that people can call the 311 number for. If you have all of a sudden, a bill that you can't pay your rent, your car note, or your car breaks down, or you have a health bill, you have this emergency, you can apply to the emergency fund and it'll give you a grant. So that's why I wanted people to understand that homelessness isn't just a mental health issue, and it's not always drugs. It's sometimes people just get to their limit and they don't have anybody to lean on. And that's what can cause them to be on the street. There are a lot more people living on the edge than people know. And so that was one story. This probably won't be out before I do this story. There's another story coming up on adopt a less adoptable pet. Now that sounds wild also, but pets are kind of a barometer of where the economy is. You see a lot of people who are older giving up their pets. Now, you don't really want to see that, because these are people who may not have anybody else, and that diminishes the love that there is in the city. I mean, the less love we have going around, the less we show each other, and then we get to be hard, and the city isn't as much fun. Really, the city I grew up in wasn't about restaurants and theater as much as it was about meeting far out kinds of people that you never would have met before, who are way different from you, and you have this, maybe a meeting on the street and you learn something and then you move on and wow, that was interesting for today, More what I'm starting to do now is I've won awards the last 2 years from the Illinois Women's Press Association for having the most winning entries in its professional contest. But I'm trying to go back to really reaching down to people. I don't want to say reaching down, reaching out. Get more experts to have me to put columns in the paper. Get more people to write for me. Another story I'm going to be doing is on pawn shops. Again, this is not going to come out probably before my story gets out. I'm all a little hyper about that, But pawn shops, they charge. So there was a law in Illinois against predatory loans, predatory lending. And the predatory lending is out of business, but pawn shops still charge 240% interest per year. And at first I did some research. I said, well, everybody, when they go to a pawn shop, they just pretty much sell it to the pawn shop and walk away. No, 68% of all loans are redeemed, which means people are really trying to buy their stuff back. So then I also talked to a vendor and I said, so tell me about this. How did this work, say, when your mama died and you had the house, and then they ultimately did lose the house and become homeless? And she said, well, in the end, yeah, we had a TV and stuff, but we had to just go. So we had to give it away. TVs are another thing that go to pawn shops. You could make a little bit of money on your TV and maybe make a payment, So that was interesting to me. And I'll tell you one more story I'm hoping to work on, which is food. This is really big to me. We did a story on the Farm Bill, because the Farm Bill, 80% of that goes to food stamps, and which is SNAP. But I'm really big on that, because a new thing for the Farm Bill this year for the food stamps is that there's something called the Thrifty, I think the Thrifty Plan. It's got a better name, but that's the gist of it is they're trying to provide more healthy food. Now the naysayers will say, oh, well, if you give people more money, they'll just buy more Cheetos. But what this plan is saying is, no, we want them to buy more vegetables and fruit, because there's way too much chronic illness in this country, and it's diet related. I mean, if people had better food, they might avoid diabetes, they might avoid high blood pressure. And I had an intern who was black, and I said, this is really important, because we got a lot of grandparents, and we got to keep them alive. And she gasped. And so I don't know what it was in her life. I didn't press, I didn't ask what it was, but we need to keep people alive. We need that second generation. We need the little help. And so I'm really big on healthcare, because we keep people alive. We keep them better. We gotta plan for people's better lives. And I mean, we write about homeless, but dead is homeless too. So if you die sooner because you haven't got a good diet, that's bad. So that's another story I really care about. So I'm trying to think of other stories, but yes, I still care about traditional homelessness. StreetWise is working on a podcast with Rivet. We're working a podcast series, and we've been doing a lot of reporting on homelessness. There was a summit that the state of Illinois had on the homeless, a lot of homeless money. I think there was $300 million that the governor appropriated for homelessness services, and we went to that, and we're going to be doing little stories as a result of that summit, just breakouts, because I really think it's easier for the reader than a long story. So, long.